Greetings, global gardeners. It's Monday. It's time to talk gardening and get your gardening week started right. So good to see everybody here today. It's so good to be here today. I've actually got a lot of work left to do in the garden, of course, but so much was accomplished this week because I had warming temperatures and was able to get outside and get things done. One of the things I did, actually, multiple times I did it during this week, was to add color to my garden, to put in some new plants that are already flowering, are ready to flower, and are going to give me future flowers in the garden. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today is what you can do to add color to your garden and also to kind of talk about the subject of whether you even need color in your garden because we all have different approaches. We all want our gardens to look the way we want our garden to be, and that may not match with what other people are doing. So, I'm going to give you some ideas of what I'm doing and some ideas of maybe what you can do, but ultimately, it does come down to your own personal desires about your garden. So when someone tells you to add red or add yellow or add purple or add white or add green, well, it's up to you to decide just exactly what you're going to do with that information. Now, I love purple in my garden. I had my granddaughters over this weekend and I let them seed my vegetable garden and I let them choose some daylily plants that I'm going to be planting as soon as they arrive with my granddaughter's help. It was probably no surprise that these girls chose a lot of purple. Purple is their favorite color. Now, we also chose yellows and we chose pinks and we chose blues, but purple was the predominant color. It's not because that they're girls, it's because that's the color they like. I love purple in my garden as well. And so I don't want to say it's genetic, but there might be a correlation to their exposure to my garden and seeing the purples that I like to display prominently, and their mother also having purples in the garden, and my granddaughter's now liking purple. So, this is one of those kind of things that you might see some trends within families. You might see trends within neighborhoods. And as you start thinking about adding to the garden, your garden, and what colors they might be, kind of look back to your past. Think about your history. Think about some of those things that you were exposed to. Maybe your grandmother had a garden with a particular color flower, and you find now that you are drawn to that color in your garden. I do think it tends to travel across generations as we have our gardens and we tend to maintain the same kind of colors. So, what that means is, in one perspective, you and your parents and your grandparents, and maybe your children and your grandchildren now have similar tastes in colors. So, you might need to look outside your comfort level to choose something different. I'm not saying you have to choose something different, but if you want to choose something different, it might be a little bit of a stretch and it might be a challenge. And it might be one of those things that some people actually find discomforting. So we'll be talking about that. Of course, we'll be answering all of your questions today that I can get to. And I encourage you to ask your questions as we begin the show and talk about color in the garden. Now, I say I like the purples. I tend to like darker purples in some areas, and I like lighter purples, lavender in other areas. So when we talk about some of these colors, it's not necessarily a hard and fast single hue of the color that we're talking about. You can have multiple colors throughout the garden. And so one of the easiest colors to have in your garden, and I think can be one of the most dramatic colors that you can use, is green. It it seems obvious, it seems simplistic, and it seems like something that you wouldn't be doing when we're talking about adding color to the garden. But think about how many different colors of green you have in your garden right now. I have at least a dozen. If I really want to be precise, I probably got 2 to 3 dozen different shades of green in my color right now. Most of my flowering plants are just beginning to bud. So I don't have a lot of color beyond green. And I think my garden is beautiful as everything is starting to grow and perk up. And in my recent travels through the UK, I saw some amazing gardens, particularly in Scotland, that had trees and shrubs and grasses and plants of all different types. Green. They were all green. They were light green. They were dark green. They had different textures in the foliage. They had different heights. It was all green and it looked like you were walking into a garden awash with different colors. Look at your garden that way. Try to get aside from just everything is green and start breaking it down to what kind of green. A pale green, a light green, a dark green. There are so many shades of green that you can incorporate into your garden to beautify it and to actually make it something that stands out. So I'm experimenting more and more with that. And with the green, you can add variegated varieties. So these are plants that are green, but they also might have yellow running through it, or they might have a lighter green or a white, or maybe even a red running through the green foliage. Those can be beautiful when designing a garden setting. Having that basic green foliage, but then having a variety of plant that leaf is modeled with something else, with some other kind of color. You see this a lot in hostas, for instance. Hostas, beautiful plant, generally are green, and there are dozens and dozens of varieties of hostas that are variegated, that have those various shades of differing colors running through the same leaf. It's not just adding a red rose to the garden, it's making those textures, making the size of the leaves, even when they're all the same color, making those the focal point. Now, when you add something like the red rose just pops when it's surrounded by all of that green. This raises the subject of choosing complementary colors when you are designing your garden. So getting a color wheel is great. And I've got a color wheel. I'm kind of a bit lazy about actually looking at the color wheel when I'm deciding what colors to add to my garden. I just choose what I like. But it's an easy way to choose your colors when you look at what you already have and you get a color wheel and you look at the opposite colors on the wheel, the complementary colors. And what's opposite green on the color wheel? Red. So if you really want your garden to pop, to explode with color, then you would put a lot of red amongst all of that green, all those different shades of green that we're talking about. If you want more subtlety, then you move to some of the colors that aren't exact opposites, like purple, for instance. Purple is a relatively complementary color to green, but it doesn't have that pop, that excitement, that explosion that red will have. But it still acts very well as a complement to the green color. So let me know what kind of questions you have about this, because it is the kind of thing that we have our own opinions. And I value all of your opinions and really want to see what you're thinking about when you're using color in the garden. Mobius 981 says, June time is bloom time. I love that. Everything is starting to pop open. And I just am amazed at June. And you're right, even for those of us who have a late season, June is the time that things are starting to pop. And those of you that have earlier seasons, June is especially a time that you have a lot of color in the garden. So I love June as well. And that's what has me excited today as we begin June, because the color is starting to show up in my garden. And I love my greens, and it gets me excited. But when those purples and those yellows and those whites and those reds start appearing, that's when I can go in the garden and just immerse myself and just lose myself in the garden setting. I sat with my granddaughters yesterday in the gazebo in the middle of the garden, listening to all the birds, having all the insects fly by. The breeze was very light and the trees were beginning to sway a little bit. It was such a wonderful setting. The only color was green, but it was still an amazing event to have all of us just sitting and enjoying the garden space. So later in June and moving into July, when I'll be surrounded by more colors, we'll do the same thing again, and it becomes a different experience, because every time that we will do that, there will be new colors and new foliage and new insects and birds and weather situations. So that's why I encourage you to have that sitting space in your garden so you can go out and enjoy it and recognize how your garden changes, not only season to season, but month to month, week to week, and even day by day. Llama is saying, I figured out last year my favorite color combo is a vibrant purple, like petunias and camphrena, and orange marigolds, white cosmos. Oh, white cosmos, I like that. And soft green foliage, or in the zinnias. It was very soothing to eye in the hot summer. I love that. Those are great combinations. And so the personal selection, and specifically when you can choose the varieties that really add to your personal enjoyment, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because those are really some good ideas. The vibrant purple of petunias, absolutely one of my favorites. I love putting in petunias all the time. I was actually very disappointed this week. I'm not typically disappointed when it comes to gardening, but I, of course, missed my opportunity to start a lot of my own annual flowers ahead of time, like I like to do. So I went to my local garden center to get some annuals, and I love getting the 6 packs. Usually they're on sale around Memorial Day, and I was going to fill up my pots and my low beds with annuals, and they didn't have any. The garden center was filled, but they weren't selling 6 packs. They weren't selling the 8 packs. They were only selling individual pots of marigolds, individual pots of petunias, individual pots of pansies, all plants I like putting in my garden this time of year. And I couldn't find the 6 packs to put in multiple. It would have been cost prohibitive for me to buy the individual potted plants of everything I wanted to put in the garden. So I said, no, I'm not giving that garden center my business to buy individual pots, because I recognize that I can get a small plant, one that is in a 6 pack, and it will grow into the bigger plant and give me color throughout the season, rather than buying a plant right now that is already blooming and might only give me a few more weeks. So just thought I'd share that, because it was so disappointing. And yet another reason to grow your own annuals and grow your own perennials and grow your own native plants, because I'm finding more and more at the garden centers that they're just not providing me what I'm looking for. I wanted some yellow flowers. I couldn't find any of the yellow flowers that I typically like to get. So I'll be growing my own much more next year so that I can have that. Petunias are one of those plants that I love to start from seed myself and put out into my garden. They can be a bit challenging, but you can choose those varieties, those specific deep purples, or what the whites, whatever the color is that you're looking for. you can choose those with the seeds and do them yourself. So uh, that's one of those kind of things that we have our personal preferences and we have our own budgets. And I don't like spending more than I need to when it comes to adding the color to the garden. Owen says the artichoke flower is a color itself. That's a great example of that. In fact, when we talk about those kind of plants, and the artichoke is a really good example. So the artichoke on a plant, the artichoke flower, what we would harvest to eat, has a different shade green than the rest of the plant. As it begins to mature and open up and actually become a flower, now it throws in that extra reddish purple color that the artichoke flower has and just transforms an artichoke plant into something completely different. So, yeah, the artichoke flower, it's hard to explain what that color is because it is a different shade of green. And then once it emerges, it becomes even more than just shades of green. So good example of that. I can only grow artichokes as an annual here in Colorado. There are a few varieties that can survive my winter, but the leaves will actually die completely down to the ground, and so it essentially becomes an annual every year. So I envy people that can have artichokes growing throughout the season because it is a beautiful plant. It's big. It makes a statement. The foliage has that very unique shape to it, and so when we talk about some of these food producing plants, I encourage you to start thinking about adding some of those type of plants into your landscape, into your flower garden. So I did a video recently about chives. I use chives as a perennial flower, and I love the purple color of the chives flowers. And so I spread them throughout my garden to add more purple, not just my vegetable garden, but throughout my pollinator garden. I've got them at the edges of my fruit trees, and it's an edible, but I'm not treating it as an edible. I'm treating it as a visual plant for my garden. Artichokes can be that way. Artichokes are basically a replacement for a big shrub you might have in your garden. Beautiful plants, large, and I'd love to be able to garden with artichokes as a landscape plant. I think it's one of those kind of things that it really can stretch the limits a little bit to how we categorize our plants and then how we use our plants within the garden. Hello, Pat. Pat says ornamental grasses provide multiple colors throughout the year, also provide windbreaks. Good example of this. I'm actually struggling right now because I grow ornamental grasses and I leave my ornamental grasses up throughout the winter, let the birds eat the seeds, let the snow and the ice form on those dried grasses, and I love that. Well, this year they really look good. I really like them, and so normally I cut back all the brown leaves to allow the green leaves to grow through. And my challenge right now is I'm I'm tempted. I've done it before, and I really like the appearance, and it kind of plays with what you're talking about of leaving some or most of those dried leaves and allow the new green leaves to grow up through them. So now a single clump of ornamental grass has got different colors between the old leaves and the new leaves. And then choosing the areas that I have with different ornamental grasses growing near each other, they're different colors, they're different sizes, they're different heights. And so, yeah, absolutely. Ornamental grasses can be wonderful for adding some of those textural and colorful components into your garden. So thank you for mentioning that. And Brent says you can add super hot peppers in almost any color you can think of. Yeah, exactly. Peppers don't need to be just for the vegetable garden and then you harvest and use them. Grow peppers for colors. There are many peppers you may have seen at nurseries, those multi-colored pepper plants. And some of those aren't edible. Some of those are intended to be a visual plant, something that you grow in your garden because of the different colors of those peppers. And yeah, the super hots really have some really vibrant oranges and vibrant reds and vibrant yellows. So I agree with you, Brent. The peppers can be a wonderful way to add the color to your garden if you're looking for something. Dusty Flat says, trying for Dusty Rose, Peach, and Cream theme, but the flower center, not the color shown. It will be by trial and error. At this point, tried a coral geranium twice, still red orange. I'm sorry to hear that it didn't come to what you're expecting, but I wanted to talk about this as well. It's on my list of when we choose the colors we want. And so I mentioned that red versus the green, doing the complementary colors, getting that excitement, that pop of color. This is a completely different approach. And I like this approach as well, where you choose more subtle colors. You have a part of the palette, the color palette you're using in your garden that might be more calming. And so when you think about the colors that excite you, also think about the colors that calm you. And so a dusty rose, a peach, a cream, those tend to be more muted, calmer colors in your garden. And when you're using those, I agree with you, and you find out that they end up being red and orange, kind of defeats your whole intent if what you were trying to do was get that nice, calming, subtle color in your garden. So depending on who you got them from, you might be able to contact the company and say, hey, you sent me the wrong color. And hopefully they'll send you a replacement. A lot of the seed and flower companies, the major ones, will honor that. If you don't get what you ordered, they'll replace it. So yeah, you can keep trying and hope the color will change. It might be easier and more reliable to just go ahead and try some new plants if you still trust the flower company. And that way you can help ensure that you want to get the colors that you're looking for. Danny says we have a Goth Garden. Ah, cool. Dark leaves or dark flowers. Besides it, we have a flower garden with all light flowers with variegated leaves. Oh, I like that idea. This is how we can design the different spaces in our garden. And I've talked before about the rooms. I like having different rooms within my garden. And each room has its own theme with different colors, with different moods, with different settings, different types of plants. And a Goth garden I absolutely love. I visited the Poison Garden when I was in Scotland, and we traveled down to northern England, and you'll see it in a video and in the months ahead. But that was the theme of that garden, and it kind of ties in with the goth idea, where it was a garden that was specifically designed partly with some of those darker plants, but everything in the garden was toxic. Everything in the garden was potentially dangerous. It was a fenced garden, and you could only go into it on a tour. But it's that same basic mindset. You select a theme for your garden area and then choose the plants to match. So there are so many beautiful dark leaf plants. I talked earlier about the different shades of green. Well, yeah, amp up the color to dark shades of green and the blacks and the intense purples. There are so many plants that have that darkness to them. Still beautiful, still incredible plants. And then you start throwing in some of the black flowers, or really the deep red, magenta colors that have some of those dark black edges to them. My mind is just running rampant with these ideas. I love it. I love it. So definitely experiment with some of that stuff. It can be so exciting. I love it. I hadn't thought about doing a goth garden, but I'm now tempted to put in a goth corner, at least, now that I'm thinking about it. Susan says, purple is my color. I have some white and red scattered throughout. And so, yeah, this ties in with what I was talking about with the purple. I have purple scattered throughout my garden, and then I have areas with red, and I have areas with white, and I have areas with yellow, and I have areas with all the colors together. But as you choose, scattering throughout, I think, really draws the whole garden together. It really adds a continuity if you have something like your white and red that is scattered throughout the garden, and I use purple that I scatter throughout the garden. That way, as you move between the different rooms and the different sections of your garden, you're seeing differences. You're seeing the difference in the leaves, you're seeing the differences in the types of plants, but you have that continuity that connects everything within your garden. Mobius is saying, I use a red bark mulch and the color matches the deck stain as well, and just put down about 10 bags. It really makes the green of all the plantings pop. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's the basic idea. And I'm glad you mentioned this. I actually didn't have it on my list today to talk about using mulch as a color component within your garden. You can buy the brown mulches, you can buy the red mulches, you can get rubber mulches in different colors, and they can definitely add that pop from the foundation of the plants. So yeah, I like that idea, having a red wood mulch, and matches again that continuity. If you have a deck that is that color and you can maintain that continuity throughout the garden, oh, I can just imagine what the visual component will be of that. Good Will Dog, nice to see you, saying my strawberries just started turning red. I swear I hear them screaming, "Get us before the birds do." I've got the strawberry flowers covering all of my plants, and I have just a couple that are beginning to fruit, but mine aren't turning red yet, except in the greenhouse. So, yeah, I hear you. I did learn. Well, I've known this for years, but I decided to finally act on it last year, in particular, to cover all my strawberries. I wasn't too concerned by the birds, but the deer ended up coming and eating all my strawberries. So now I've got welded wire hoops over the welded wire fencing hoops over all my strawberry beds, and those are covered with bird netting. That's how I deal with the strawberry screaming about the birds, is I just keep everything covered and I don't have to worry about it. It does make it a little bit more challenging. You can see at the beginning or the bottom of this photo, those are my strawberries this morning. And you can see the fencing that I have over them. Can't quite see the netting, but there's bird netting to keep the birds out. And it works because I want to eat my strawberries. I don't want the deer or the birds to eat them. Linda says, a dear friend pointed out that white is a great color in the garden. I agree. It really does make the greens and any other color really pop. I'd never thought of it as a garden color before that. Yeah, and the use of white. So I've talked about this before, where you can actually build a garden area and design your garden for nighttime. And using white flowers in a night garden is stunning. When you have the white flowers, and particularly if you have subtle lighting that can really accent those whites, it's incredible. And like moonflowers, there are flowers that don't even open until night, white flowers. And so using white as a color at night is something that I really, really like. But during the day, throughout the garden, white tends to be lost when we have a garden and we're putting lots of flowers in and we're putting the white flowers in. I love white. I use white in a lot of my border areas, but it doesn't pop. It just kind of gets lost. But when you put in something like the greens or the reds or the purples next to the whites, now all of a sudden both really start popping out. You see the white more when it's next to a different color, and you see that different color even more intensely when it's next to a white. So yeah, absolutely. Think of it as a color, and kind of think of it as a color actuator or a color modifier. because when I put the whites in, I try to put them in with those other colors to really make that whole area much more vibrant. But you can do it all by yourself. And I saw some beautiful gardens uh, in both England and Scotland that were white, just absolutely white. And some of the foliage had white variegation on it, and there were different sizes, and there were small white flowers and big white flowers. Yeah, white can definitely be something that adds a pop to your garden. Shandy's Garden says, I love pink, but I have all the colors out there with the decor and blooms. So that's the way to do. Choose your favorite. It's okay to have your favorite. When you have kids, you can't publicly announce which is your favorite kid. In the garden, you can announce which is your favorite color and which is your favorite flower. Absolutely no trouble with that. And Eva, hello to you in Truckee, California, trying to get my garden ready for summer before leaving for Denmark. Awesome. Hope you have a wonderful time in Denmark. I haven't been there yet, but it's definitely on my list. Haley Elizabeth says, consider planting cool tone flower plants on the west side of your house and warm tones on the east for balance. Oh, I like that idea. I haven't taken that approach, but interesting that you say that, because as I think about how I've planted mine, yeah, I do actually tend to have more of the cool tones on the west and the warm tones on the east. I mean, just coincidentally, I didn't do it on purpose. But I wonder if there's something about the way that your eyes and your brain tend to look at that, because the sun is different in those areas as well. So when the sun is rising in the east, I'm looking for that color early in the morning. And when the sun is setting in the west, I like that calmer tone to the plants. So interesting. I like that idea, and it's interesting that my garden just kind of has naturally followed that. But to do it intentionally, great suggestion. Absolutely love that suggestion. Dr. Melody says, I love all colors of climbing morning glories. So yeah, this is a great idea. So when we're talking about these colors, what I haven't talked about yet is trellising. You know, I talked a little bit about choosing the different heights of the flowers, but having color grow in all different directions. And to have the color, I like the color at my feet. I like the color at eye level and everything in between, of course. And morning glories are beautiful plants, and particularly if you can find those climbing morning glories. And they tend to do well in many of our gardens. Grow them up along the side of a fence, or maybe along your wall. Or if you've got a deck, I did this at a previous house where I put a trellis on the side of the deck and then grew from the ground up onto the trellis, so that essentially it created a wall on the wood deck of those vining plants. So I love that idea. And absolutely, you can choose all kinds of different colors with a plant like morning glory, and it can make a really big difference in just making your whole garden make a statement, where it's not just the low plants or the plants that we are walking through. It's bringing the color up to eye level and above to really make things pop. Serena says, I have a lot of daylilies. They spread by rhizomes. When can rhizomes be taken out and planted elsewhere? So actually, I'm going to be planting some daylilies today. And I mentioned that my granddaughters had chosen some more daylilies, so I'll be putting those in. I love daylilies throughout the garden, different colors. I love having the different clumps of different colors. And one of the things you can do with daylilies that make them such a great plant is you can divide them. Now, you can divide daylilies in spring, summer, or fall. They tend to be best divided in spring or fall. So if you do it in spring before the new growth really develops, then you can spread them into new areas, and after you divide them, you'll have flowers generally in that same year if you have a big enough uh, clump of the daylilies that you are dividing. You can divide a big clump and put it into multiple areas and get color in the same year if you do it in the spring. You can also do it pretty well in the fall. After the daylilies have flowered and cut off all the flowers, now that the foliage, the leaves, have sucked up all that sun energy, put it down into those roots. That's a good time to divide them into other areas. And then next year, those clumps will start developing and you'll get new flowers. You can do it in the summer right after they flower, but it's generally not a good idea to do much transplanting in the summer because it just puts a lot of stress on the plants. So spring and fall are typically the best times to do the daylilies. And when you look at the daylilies, when you separate them, you'll see the leaves and they tend to grow in a line. They're called fans, and so you want to try to have a clump that has at least 3 fans when you move it. That will tend to make it get better established and more likely to have color in the next season. You can separate out the daylilies into individual flowers. And so I did a video about this, Serena. Check my video that I showed recently that talked about planting the daylilies. And I talk a little bit about how big the clump should be when you choose to put them in the ground. Having more of those fans can give you a stronger plant. You can still do them now, depending on what daylilies you have, but you might want to let them flower as well and wait until fall to separate them. I was going to do a video for this spring, actually, to show how to divide my daylilies. I had intended to have that video come out while I was in the UK, but I just got busy planning my trip and never actually got to dividing my daylilies. So I'll be making that video, but it's not going to come out into the fall because now I'm going to show why you want to divide your daylilies, because the clumps that I want to divide are kind of old and they're not flowering as well. That's a sign that you need to divide your daylilies. About every 3 to 5 years is a good target to get into that habit of dividing your daylilies. Emily Kay says, over the years, I've added the project flowers my kids have planted at school. I've saved the seeds and now have marigold, sunflower, and nasturtium varieties that are color and memories. I love that. That's such a great idea. I talk all the time about creating those memories in the garden and also preserving those memories you have within your garden. And this is a fantastic idea. I absolutely love this. So yeah, if you've got kids or grandkids and they're bringing home those plants, put them out, save the seeds, and you'll have those memories for many, many years to come. And especially nasturtiums are a great variety, a climbing variety that you can get some amazing color. And I love nasturtiums. And then you throw in the marigolds and sunflowers. And so this raises a good point when we talk about something like marigolds and sunflowers in particular. When we think of those, we tend to think of them as being yellow flowers. Sunflower is yellow, a marigold is yellow. A marigold might be orange, but that's the color. Well, there are some amazing colors of marigolds and sunflowers. There are sunflowers that are magenta and vibrant orange and with red tinges to it. And so when we talk about some of these, the Mexican sunflower is known because it's orange, for instance. And so think about some of these classical plants we put in our garden. We put in our garden because of their yellow color, and then start looking beyond that yellow and think about the oranges and the browns and the deep, rich colors that those same types of plants can offer by just choosing a different variety. So, but I love that idea. Putting your kids' flowers in the garden, absolutely love that. So Good for you. Congratulations on that. Haley says, I always have a few trays of zinnias and native flowers hanging out on my back patio. Yeah. So I talk a lot about putting the plants in the garden, but yeah, I've got that listed here. Pots, containers. Put the same thing into the pots and containers in and around your garden, and you can still get that same kind of color. And then if you mix the plants with a pot that has a vibrant color, now you kind of get the best of both worlds. So I'm starting to, and you'll see this in my garden as I start building it out in the next couple of years. I'm adding more and more colorful pots in my garden to then grow the plants within those plants. So when we talk about the green and the red being complementary colors, I have a vibrant red pot, and I'll be growing greens in that pot of different colors of green to get that complementary color within a container that just sits as though we're its own plant growing in the garden. And you can do that along a patio. You can do it along a deck. The same idea. Have flower boxes that you're growing all your plants in, zinnias, native flowers, whatever it happens to be. Grow those in those hanging boxes and mix it up a little bit, and maybe even paint the boxes or get those hanging boxes in different colors already. They come in plastic, different colors, or you can paint wooden ones. And then when you put all those colors in, you get that double pop of color. So I like that idea of mixing it up and definitely taking advantage of some of the space that you have that is not really garden space, but you can still use the colors in your garden around the edges and maybe draw people to the garden. So I use that with purples as well. I've done that in the past where I'll use containers with purple plants on the path leading to the garden, leading to the pollinator garden in particular. And then once I get to the pollinator garden, there's more of those purples. But now there are the whites and the yellows and the oranges and the reds that are mixed in with those purples. So it's kind of a lead in to the garden by using some of those flower boxes and pots and containers. So you can see how you can really take the gardening to a completely different level when you start incorporating color and then deciding how you want that color to really fit with the rest of your garden. Shandy's garden says, beautiful Malabar spinach vine takes all the heat you can give it. Red vine with thick, deep green leaf that has some mucilage in it and tastes a lot like okra, but I like eating the smaller leaves. I've seen pictures. I've never grown the Malabar spinach, but yeah, this is another one. There's so many plants we can grow in our vegetable garden that have such rich color, and if you can match them with your environment, and that's a big tip to take away from Shandy's garden, is choose what will grow in your garden. It's so easy, and I've made this mistake way too many times. You get your catalog, you're online, you go to the nursery, you see a plant, you see that flower, you say, I need that in my garden. You buy it, you put in your garden, and you didn't take the time to see if it's actually going to grow in your garden. Is it going to grow in your soil pH? Is it going to grow in the heat of your summer? If it's a perennial, is it going to survive your winter? And so often, I saw it again this week, because when I go to my garden center, I always check the clearance section. And this week I found some amazing lilies in the clearance section. But I also found a whole bunch of other plants that don't match my zone. And some of them were perennial plants, and they don't match my zone. And so the garden center is selling perennial plants to gardeners in my area. And unless you know what your zone is, unless you check the plant tag, you might be buying plants that aren't going to survive the winter in your garden. That's okay if you're growing it as an annual and expecting it to die. But if you buy a perennial expecting it to survive the winter and grow the next year and it dies, well, that's a waste of time and money. And in some ways, I think the garden centers should be held liable for that. But you really don't see that they take any responsibility. Just be aware that when we're talking about these colors and these plants, match them to your garden so that you get something that you can really enjoy, particularly if it's something that you want to enjoy in the years ahead. Charlene Cooper, hello, says, I experienced the same thing this year. So I started my seeds of marigold, zinnias, and cosmos in May, and they are growing quickly. I'm going to do more perennials next time with winter sowing. So yeah, I was talking about my lack of finding the plants I was looking for. So good for you starting all those plants. I've spread seed around my garden. Luckily, we've had some wonderful rain this week. So I'm hoping some of my flower seeds, like the cosmos that I sowed outside, are doing well. But if you can do them ahead of time, definitely do them ahead of time. That's a great way to keep the color coming as we move forward in the years ahead. Jason says some people will grow lettuces and cabbage for color in landscape beds. Not sure if it's the edible kind. Yeah, and kale, add that to the list as well. So lettuces and cabbage, and particularly kale, can come in amazing colors. Now, many of the kale, the decorative kale, is not the same edible type that we would grow in our garden. And some of the cabbages are really intended for the color and not to be eaten. So do check on that, absolutely. But a low plant along a border, oh yeah, those are wonderful plants. And particularly with the different types of foliage, I grow a speckled lettuce that to eat, but it's a beautiful plant. And so there's all kinds of options. So yeah, thank you, Jason. Good tip to look beyond what we typically think of as the perennial garden plants. They can be annual vegetable garden plants. and it goes beyond that. If you start thinking about some of the biennial plants, like onions, for instance. So I like growing onions and carrots that are biennials. So generally, they're not going to flower until the second season. And I think they're beautiful flowers. And so I'll grow plants like that, adds like an alternative to an allium. So you might have an allium bulb in your garden, and they'll send up that tall stalk. I've got some purple alliums in my garden right now, a nice big ball cluster of flowers to give height to my perennial garden. But those alliums, many of them are flowering early in the season before the rest of the flowers appear. And so it really doesn't make as a strong a statement. But when you put in something like the carrots, which looks very similar to St. Anne's lace, it now becomes a perennial plant that is flowering in a beautiful white to accent some of those other colors later in the season into the summer. So vegetable garden plants, particularly those that flower, can add to the garden in addition to the color that they have on their leaves. So we're thinking outside the box today. We're thinking outside the box. Karen is asking, I've never been able to get chives to grow from seed. Ideas. Change how you're growing them. So my chives actually will pop up. The reason I'm spreading chives throughout my garden is because I just allow them to flower and turn the seed, and then the seed just drops to the ground, and then the seed pops up into a new plant. So you can try that approach. If you've got chives outside, just let them flower and let those seeds drop, and some of those seeds may naturally sprout. Now, the percentage is extremely low. At least I can say that in my garden. I might have 100 of those chive seeds and have 2 plants that pop up. I have had better success doing it indoors, but you treat them like onions, or not, yeah, onion seeds. Onion seeds and chive seeds are basically started the same way. I've got a video where I talk about how to start the carrot seeds. Very shallow planting, and I start them under lights to help with that germination, and they can start growing as soon as they sprout. And you'll probably get better germination if you start them indoors under lights in a cool room. So give that a try. A couple different ways to do it. And then you can experiment with different types of soil, whether it be outside with your garden soil or maybe a seed starting mix or potting soil indoors. They are one of those kind of seeds that doesn't last for a long time. So if you have seeds, try to use them in the first year or two to get the best germination from them. And so old seed doesn't do well when it comes to something like that. But just keep trying. Just keep trying. Do a couple different things, and hopefully you'll start seeing more success. Nan says the purple potato had purple leaves on the inside of the plant and melts to green as the leaves elongate. Yeah, I love growing purple potatoes. I did a video about this a while back with my granddaughters. We grew a purple garden bed one year in the vegetable garden. And so we grew purple kohlrabi and purple beans and purple carrots and purple lettuce and purple potatoes, of course. And beautiful garden bed, particularly with the changing colors of the potato leaves. And then when you harvest, and I love those purple potatoes. So yeah, great suggestion on another one of those plants that you can grow. You can eat it, but you can also grow it in other areas as a plant just to add color to the garden. And the potato leaf is relatively unique in its shape. And so if you're looking for that variety of foliage in your garden with the different shapes, yeah, think about doing something like a potato leaf amongst all of your other flowering plants to give you a different foliage color and foliage shape. So I like that idea of using potato plants as something to add that unique color to the garden. It really can make a difference. Hello, Sean. Sean says, I'm establishing a meadow surrounding the garden. Currently, blue flax is blooming and vibrant. I love blue flax. Soon there will be purples from Rocky Mountain bee plant and lots of yellows, reds from blanket flowers. So yeah, the Gaillardia, the blanket flowers, I love those plants. So if you don't know that plant, that's a plant that has the red and the yellow, often some browns, maybe some magenta, all on the same flower. Absolutely stunning. And I grow those in both my front and my backyard, actually. And so I love that idea. But yeah, what Sean's talking about is a great approach when we talk about the color in the garden. And I've kind of touched on it a little bit with the early blooming and the late blooming, but plan your garden with those colors in mind. And so the daylilies that I'm going to be planting today in my garden, I chose specifically because the daylilies will be blooming at different times. So some of the daylilies I'm planting are blooming early in the season, like June and July. Some are mid-season, like July and August, and some are late season, like August and September. And I'm putting them all in the same clump. So while their leaves are all going to be growing and they'll be similar, I will get an entire season filled with color, but the colors will change as the season progresses. And so the idea of doing blue flax early and getting that blue, I love the blue in the garden, but then designing your garden to evolve into the purples as the Rocky Mountain bee plant, and Sean's Rocky Mountain bee plants are stunning. And then that moves into Gaillardia, which tends to be slightly later flowering. Oh, wonderful, wonderful idea for having an entire season of color by choosing the plants and choosing those colors. I love my lilacs. Lilacs are such a wonderful plant, but you only get flowers for a few weeks out of the year. Do something like an entire season of color. So I haven't done it yet, but this is in my future phase in that area where I have lilacs. That area is just the lilacs, and the lilacs flower, and then they're done. But to add other plants that can keep the season going makes the entire garden alive with color for the entire season that you're growing. And I have a couple flax plants, and I need a field of flax. I love that idea. I love the idea of having a field of flax and a field of wildflowers. Definitely the way to go. So John C. is raising a good point as well. A lot of people forget that even the fences can bring color to the garden. If stained bright colors, they can also make the plants pop that are in front of them. Absolutely. So I have recently built a fenced area. Right now it's got a base stain on it that's kind of a yellow color. But that's exactly what I'm going to do with that fence, is I'm going to stain it, because what's going to be growing in front of that fence are espalier apple trees that I've planted in front of it. And so the espalier branches will be covering that fence. And I want the fence to bring color to the garden as well. And then in my walled garden, my secret garden area that I'm building out of redwood, it's the same idea. I'm going to be using a redwood stain to bring out that wonderful red color of the wood. So you're exactly right. This is something a lot of people do forget, and I'm actually this year incorporating that idea intentionally into my garden to add to the color palette of the entire space. And so if you've got an old ugly fence and it doesn't add anything to the garden, and you're trying to figure out a way to enliven the plants that are growing near that fence, paint the fence and bring some color to it. Stain works great on wood, but particularly old fences, you can get all kinds of enamel paints that you could put on an old fence and immediately brighten it up. So yeah, great suggestion, John. it's everything in our garden. So I talked a little bit about the colored pots. Now we've talked about the colored fences, and we've talked about the colored flowers. Also think about adding some color in the art that you might bring to the garden. So I've shown in previous videos the spinners that I have in my garden that spin in the wind. And I have one in particular that I chose because of all the different colors, the vibrant colors of that garden art. And so that area of my garden is spinning in the wind with color. And I'll be adding more things like that throughout the garden as well. So it doesn't have to be one thing. It doesn't have to be just the flowers or just the foliage or just the fence or just the pots or just the art. Make it a combination of everything. And with a little thought and some planning, you can have it all tie together. So I am going to be making some more stepping stones with my granddaughters. And one of the things I want to do is have them, as a child, decide what color we're going to paint those stepping stones. So they're basic round stepping stones. I did a video on how I make them with the leaf imprints on them. Some of them might end up being red, some might be yellow. I'm probably going to have some purples, but adding the whimsy of a child to the color selection within your garden, it kind of ties into what we were talking a bit earlier about taking the projects that your kids bring home from school and planting them in the garden. Well, yeah, get your kids involved with the garden in some of the color selection. And it can be as simple as just the stepping stone color when we start thinking about the garden as a whole and trying to bring different colors to different parts of the garden. And so it's endless. It's endless on what we can do when we start talking about developing our gardens and adding the colors to the garden. Absolutely. Carolyn is saying cow panel arches and trellises, antique brass beds and cloth tubs, and a rusty old metal stool with terracotta pots gives a fun vibe. I like that idea. I like that idea a lot. I have a friend in my gardening club, and actually have a picture in my book of some of her rusty tub beds. And it sounds very similar to what you're talking about, because she also has some of the arches and trellises right next to those claw tubs. It is. It is a fun vibe. It's kind of funky. It kind of has that rustic look to it, and I like it a lot as well. So be creative. You know, rust is a color. Why not bring rust as a color into your garden by incorporating those iron structures that are rusting? I think, you know, when that's why I say it's endless. When we start talking about adding these different colors in different ways and thinking beyond just the leaves and the flowers, it really can pop when you start thinking about the structures in the garden and the hardscape, you know, maybe painted rocks. My daughter has done that by her mailbox, where they paint rocks and put them around the base of their mailbox. It's beautiful. And then they put some strawberry plants around that, and they have some sedum around that. And now you have what is normally just an ugly mailbox that most of us have. But by painting some rocks and throwing in a few bits of plants around it, you've now created a garden space. Then the mailbox kind of just fades into the background because everyone's looking at the painted rocks instead of the mailbox. So I think that's a good way to approach it, and in expanding the areas where we decide to do different things in the garden. So I like that idea a lot, of the rusty tub and all of the other rustic materials in the garden. We can always find some. That there's a shop, I've been thinking about going to it and maybe making a video, but it's near me, and it's kind of one of those antique stores that sells a lot of those old kind of things. It tends to have a bit of a garden focus to it, but old galvanized steel tubs, things like that. You can find some of those old white porcelain wash basins. I love those kind of things in the garden. So for me, that's an option. If you like those kind of things, start looking for them, and maybe consider adding something like that to your garden when you're looking for that little funky vibe. Then you're not really sure how to get it. Sometimes it's right in front of you, but you just haven't thought about it as being something that you would add to your garden. So yeah, I see some people talking about coneflowers. The purple coneflower, the echinacea, absolutely love that. That's a staple in my garden. I love the coneflowers. They're beautiful. And so, you know, talking about the textural differences. So one of the reasons I like the coneflowers is not only the foliage, it's basic green, but it adds color to the garden. But then you've got that beautiful flower. And then you add in the cone, the actual pointed part of the flower, the reason we call it a coneflower. And that's a completely different texture and color of its own. And so when we can choose a flower that gives us so many different textures and colors, especially if it does well, coneflowers do well in my garden, I say go for it. So I absolutely love my coneflowers. I've tried growing different colors, different varieties, but the basic purple is still my favorite. That's the one I tend to go to and plant the most of, but experiment a little bit. I tried planting kind of a peach colored coneflower a number of years ago. It didn't do well. It didn't come back. And I think, you know, that, and often when we get those really unique varieties that sound too good to be true, often they are. Even though they might be appropriate for our zone, I'm just not always convinced that they have developed the stability of that particular cultivar yet to survive in a lot of the areas that supposedly they'll survive in. And that's been my experience, particularly with the coneflowers. But the purple ones, absolutely. So what are other favorites of yours? So I grow my purple coneflowers, the echinacea, right next to my Rudbeckia, my black-eyed Susan, right next to my Shasta daisies. I love that combination of the white and the yellow and the purple growing kind of intermixed all in one big clump. And I've done that for years. At every garden I've had for probably the last 20 years, I do that combination because I just like it. For me, those three colors together and those three flowers together, particularly because they're flowering for about the same length of time and at the same time in the garden. So I have those three colors that are so nice and they play so well together. And I can see them almost every day during the growing season once the flowers start appearing. So, what kind of varieties and color combinations are you doing that you always do like that because they are something that gives you that comfort, something that gives you that joy within the garden? I'm always looking for new combinations and new things to grow, and it's the finding, the discovery of those new combinations that I absolutely love. If I find a new combination, then now I can keep doing it. I planted daylilies last year, and they haven't flowered yet this year. But that's what I did with different clumps of daylilies. Not only trying to put them in these clumps with different daylilies that are going to flower at different times, but also choosing some that were going to be flowering at the same time, but different colors. And so I'm anxious for my daylilies to start flowering so I can see if some of these combinations that I envisioned actually work. And the nice thing about daylilies is you can dig them up and move them someplace else. So I don't know yet, but I'm experimenting. I'm trying new combinations to see if I can come up with some of those color combinations that really speak to me, and then I can repeat them in other areas of the garden. So you don't have to have the answer the first time out. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to try different combinations, wait for the flowers, and then see if it works or not. You haven't wasted a year. It's been a year of discovery. And next year, you try different combinations, maybe in the exact same spot. And you keep doing that until ultimately you find your happy combination. And it might take years. You might get lucky the first time, but try different things. And maybe you'll be able to have some success with the experimentation. Shandy's garden says, I've got yellow and burgundy and peach and white lilies that all come up at different times. Love them. If it's possible, it does look like some of them have crossed over the years. There you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about, where you have the different colors, they're coming up at different times. And yeah, it's possible that some of them might cross. It's also possible that one of them might become dominant, but wait and see. When you have an area like that where you say love them with a couple exclamation points, it's obviously working. So keep doing it. Keep checking to see if there's going to be some variation. And I had that with columbines a number of years ago, probably 25 years ago now. I was growing a bed with columbines, a number of different colors of columbines. They were all flowering at about the same time. But by the third year, I think I had 4 or 5 different colors that I had planted. But 5 years later, it was the dominant Rocky Mountain purple and white that filled the space. So they weren't necessarily crossing, though I think there was some of that, and the dominant gene did prevail, but also just some of the plants were stronger than others. So it was that one particular type of columbine that ended up taking over the space. And you know what? I kind of like that better. In the beginning, it was a bit of a mishmash of colors with the different columbines. I liked it. But when that entire garden bed ended up being the same type of columbine, it really was stunning. And so I've been talking till now of the little splotches of color throughout the garden. You can make a wonderful statement by having the same plant, the same color, fill a space. The blue flax earlier was a perfect example of this. Something that just fills the space with its color and makes a statement. You don't have to have the variety. You can settle on something simple. And sometimes it's that simplicity that actually adds the incredible beauty that we're looking for. So many different options. I do a little bit of both. I've got some beds that are one color, and I've got other beds that are multiple colors. I try to mix it up, and it's in search of that moment when I see it and go, oh yeah, that's what I'm looking for. That's the success in that bed, and so I'll keep doing it. Shiny Rock says, is it necessary to dry seeds before planting them, or can I plant them fresh out of the garden itself? Because as I watch, I'm in the garden and I just planted an entire green okra pod full of seed. So as long as the seeds are mature, you can plant them right away. And so generally, the reason we are drying our seeds is because the seeds don't appear until the end of the season. So you've got the flower that develops, and then the flower that turns to seed, and then that seed needs to fully mature. That whole process takes months. And so by the time we're saving our seed, the season is done. We don't have enough time to sow those seeds and grow again. So that's why we dry them. They save better and store better when they're dry. And then the next year we plant those seeds. But if your season is long enough, you can definitely take the seeds once they're mature and then put them right into the ground and or into a pot or a container or however you're growing them and start growing them again. So yeah, if you've got okra pods that are mature, now do understand that most of the plants, and when I talk about the maturity of the seed, that's leaving the pod on the plant past the point of when we might harvest it to eat it. So, for instance, peas and beans, we generally are harvesting before they're fully mature to eat. So, you need to leave them on so that the pod darkens. And you should notice for most of these potted plants that the pod will change color. It often becomes darker as the seeds inside mature. And you also see it in fruits. So the peppers, the chilies we're growing, we may harvest a jalapeno when it's green, but a green jalapeno is not ripe yet. And so the seeds inside may not be viable. The peppers need to turn yellow or orange or purple or red, and then we collect the seeds to grow those. Cucumbers, we harvest cucumbers when they're still green and we eat them. If you want to save cucumber seeds, you need to leave the cucumber on the vine until it turns yellow. And that's a sign that the seeds are mature inside. So you can definitely plant the seeds in the same season, but they just need to be mature and need to make sure that the pod, or the fruit has stayed on the plant long enough for those seeds to be viable. Experiment and go ahead and put some of those, especially if you've already put the seeds in. But yeah, definitely try putting the seeds in and see how they do. And that can give you a really good indication of when they reach that maturity point. and that's where the garden journal comes in as well. If you keep track of those kind of things, then next year or later this season, if you're growing the same plant, you can get a good feel for the maturity point and maybe decide to grow them again. I like the idea of being able to grow from your own plants within the same season. If your season's long enough, go for it. That's a great idea. and it extends your season with a plant that you know is already something that likes your garden soil and will do well in your area. And so planting the plants that do well, planting what you like in the garden and that you think will do well is the first step. But then when you find out the plants that like your garden, that do well in your soil and your climate, those are really the ones I encourage that you divide, save the seeds, and move to new areas of your garden because they've already demonstrated that they're going to do well. It's when you choose a plant and it struggles, and then you divide it and you try to move it, and it continues to struggle. You might be fighting a losing battle with some of those plants over time, just because it I think it's easier when we take the easy approach with gardening by finding those plants that work well. That gives us more time to experiment with some of those new plants. Gardens Happen says chard is a good way to add color to your garden. Yeah, the rainbow mix of chard. I love that. And so yeah, get a packet of the rainbow chard, and you'll get some white chard and some yellow chard and kind of some light pink, almost magenta, I guess, chard. And then, of course, there'll be green chard and red chard. Good suggestion. And it's a pretty big plant, especially if it's in a happy spot. And the leaves can be beautiful leaves as well. So you've got the stalks that can be vibrant colors. Then you have the beautiful foliage. Good suggestion. Chard is another one of those that you can throw around the landscape and make for good colors. And Shandy's Garden says, don't forget about our green stock vertical gardens being sold in all the beautiful colors. Yeah, exactly. In fact, there's 2 new colors. I'm not sure if they've announced that yet or if I just got an advance email. But yeah, they've got all kinds of colors, and I'm doing that as well, and have done that for others, getting the green stock towers in different colors and using that as a visual component within your garden. I love that. You may see in future videos what I'm doing with my green stocks this year is mixing the colors. So I've got the different colors, but I'm going to, instead of keeping the same color within the same tower, I'm mixing them up. So they're going to be a mix of different colors within the same tower. Again, to add that variety and to add that color component to an area of my garden. Now, those are just outside my back door on my deck, but it's part of my garden and it adds color. It's like having the hanging baskets on your deck. Anything you can do to bring that color and bring those plants in, I love that idea. So yeah, click on the link below and check out Greenstock to see the new colors coming out. and they might be one that you might be interested in. I know I am, and I may be making a video about one of those colors in particular, since it's my favorite color. So we'll be looking forward to that. Gothbrook says, I've heard this both ways. Does feeding strawberries while they are fruiting affect their flavor? No, not really. So the flavor, when we talk about flavor of all these plants we've been talking about today, it's really the genetics of the plant that most affect the flavor. Now, when we talk about something like strawberries, the watering will affect the flavor. And so if you're not watering enough, and so the fruit is smaller and it tends to be denser, then it's going to have a slightly different flavor, but it's still going to have that same basic flavor of whatever the variety happens to be. The feeding of the strawberries, unless you're using foliar feeding, and that may or may not work. But if you're feeding with a fertilizer going into the soil, it may or may not make any difference at all. If your soil has all the nutrients that the strawberries need, then adding fertilizer to that soil is going to make no difference whatsoever, because the plant's only going to take up the nutrients it needs. And if the nutrients are already there, then adding the fertilizer during the fruiting is not going to change their flavor. Now, if your soil is deficient in some of those nutrients that a strawberry needs. So phosphorus is one of those nutrients that tends to help with the flowering and fruiting of plants. So if your soil is deficient in phosphorus and you add phosphorus fertilizer to your soil, then yes, that can affect the flavor, because with that phosphorus deficiency, the fruit might not develop as well. It might be smaller, it might be denser, it might not have the same texture. So I focus on the soil, of course, and my strawberries taste great. I am not fertilizing my strawberries at any point in the growing season, and all my strawberries taste wonderful because I've got good soil, because I water regularly, and because I have chosen the varieties that taste great. And I've got different varieties. I talk about some of my favorite varieties in a video I did last year, and they taste different. I treat them all the same, and they taste different. So if you don't recognize that different cultivars taste different, you could look at it and say, oh, those didn't get fertilized, so that's why they taste different. It's because they didn't get fertilized. It comes down to the variety that you've chosen and whether your soil is good enough and whether you're watering them enough, and then you're going to get the taste that you're looking for. And that's really, I think, the key is just giving them a good growing condition and choosing the right kind of plants so that you like the flavor, and then the rest is just going to automatically happen, and you're going to love the flavors. I've already been enjoying some of the strawberries I'm growing in my green stock in my greenhouse, and I'm looking forward to the strawberries outside. So last year, and I talked about it in that video, I loved the TriStar, absolutely loved the TriStar variety. I've been growing Quinault for years. I love the Quinault. Two different flavors. They both do great. I also grew Ozark Beauty, but I didn't get any flowers or fruit on the Ozark Beauty last year. This year, they're covered with flowers. So I haven't tried the Ozark Beauty yet. I'm expecting good things. Hopefully, they're going to be up there with the TriStar and the Quinault, but I don't know until I taste them. They're being treated just like everything else, and so I'm expecting that I'm going to have big, juicy berries. And based on everything I read when I ordered them, they're going to taste great. So that's the biggest way to get your strawberry flavor good during the fruiting, is just do it right from the very beginning before you even put the plants in, and making sure that the soil is good. Chase says, pro tip to improve soil cheaply, especially sandy soil, look to 100% bentonite cat litter granules. So that's an interesting tip. And yeah, kitty litter. And so do check to make sure you've got the right type of kitty litter, because there are different formulations of different materials, everything from the clay that kind of is where the kitty litter has come from in years past, to now they've got some polymers. And I wouldn't necessarily put those polymer newfangled cat litters in the garden, but some of those that have a bentonite base to it, yeah, that makes sense. I would caution, start with a little bit so you don't overdo it and create a problem in your garden. But as an amendment along with organic matter in sandy soil, it makes sense. So thank you for that, Jay. I'm guessing that's something that you have tried. It definitely will improve the structure of the soil. And so that's why you would add something like the bentonite to the sand, is because the sand is dominant, and you want to try to get more of a balanced soil between the clay and the silt and the sand and the organic matter together. That's why you would blend it together. So yeah, give it a try, a little at a time, until you find that happy spot and your plants are happy. And don't forget the organic matter, because that really does make a big difference. Lisa says, I have my strawberries in a green stock. Would you not need to fertilize since the green stock is filled with potting mix? Yes. So that is different. And I talk about that. I have a video from a couple months ago talking about how to grow strawberries in a green stock. And I talk about that in the video, that because you're growing in a mix, you do need to fertilize. So I differentiate between the strawberries growing in my beds with soil, and I don't fertilize those because I amend the soil and I top dress with compost and mulch. But in my green stock, you're exactly right. Because that's a potting mix and it's not a soil, you do need to fertilize. And so it's earlier in the season tends to be a good time to fertilize. What I just did, and I talk about I didn't just do it, but I talk about it in the video, is I topped off my tiers within the green stock with an amended new potting mix that had some fertilizer in it, because the potting mix will sink and it will break down in time. So you do need to top it off each year. And I top it off with a mix that has some slow release fertilizer in it. And then usually 2 to 3 times over the course of the year, I will fertilize with a liquid fertilizer. So yes, that holds true with most containers and pots. When you are growing in them, you do, in most cases, need to fertilize because they're not getting the benefit of all those soil microbes and all that organic matter and soil structure that our in-ground and raised bed plants are getting. So thank you for asking that question, because that is a key difference. And I don't often talk about the fertilizing of the containers, but it does make a difference if you want to have those happy strawberries. So yeah, check out that video that I did a couple months ago, because I talk about, I show some of the problems I was having with the strawberries and why they needed to be fertilized, and water concerns and heat concerns and all those other fun things when you're growing something like strawberries in a green stock. It's easy, but can be a bit challenging when you throw in those considerations like the fertilizer needs. Cheesecake is asking, what can you grow in a green stock? Anything. You really can grow just about anything that you would grow in a pot or a container in a green stock. As big as tomatoes and peppers, I tend to grow the smaller plants like lettuces and herbs and strawberries. I do a lot of basil. I have grown peas and beans. So all kinds of things you can grow in a green stock. Basically, it's stacked containers. And so anything you can grow in a container, you can grow in a green stock in a much smaller footprint with an efficient watering system. That's why I love them, and that's why so many others love them and keep getting more and more colors to add to our garden. So you can find some of that information on green stock. You can also check out my videos. I got a bunch of videos on green stock that show some of the different things I'm growing. Last year, I did a video where I grew flowers. And so I used green stock to bring the color to my garden. So I grew petunias and pansies and marigolds and many other flowers in an entire tower. And it was beautiful, and made a video about it, of course. So those are the kind of things that you can do in a green stock. And now you throw in the color. Check out the green stock site. When I visited green stock a few months ago, they're doing some incredible things in one area, and some of the pictures are on their website, where they're using the color of the green stock, kind of like I was talking about earlier, where you paint your fence and you use that as a color and then grow the plants in front of the fence. You can do the same thing with the green stock. You choose the color of the green stock, and then you grow the colors to accent each other. And that's kind of what I did last year with my brown basket weave green stock tower. And then I grew all the beautiful colors within it. And so that muted brown background, for me, really made those colors pop. So yeah, click on the link below and go to Greenstock, and you'll see some of those cool ideas about what you can do in the garden using a Greenstock, because I love it. It's one of those things that is easy to add color and plants to your garden anywhere by using the Greenstock. And of course, I'll be doing more of that. Like I said, there's new colors, and you can expect to see more videos. Outlier Gardener, thank you for that. Thank you for another week of gardening inspo. I appreciate the support, and I appreciate the comment, and I hope I did inspire a little bit all of you in something that maybe you hadn't thought about before, something you want to try, or just the general idea of how wonderful color is in the garden. And so my day lilies are a big focus right now. You'll be seeing this from me in future videos. I've been focusing a lot on building my garden and the basics of the garden. I'm now moving into a completely new phase in my garden where, for the most part, the structures are complete. And now it's time to start filling them in with plants. And color is a big part of that, and a big part of my plan to make my garden just a showcase, because I've built these beautiful beds. I built these beautiful rooms within the garden. Now we need to put in the color and the textures and the sizes to really turn it into a space that is jaw-dropping for me. If it drops my jaw, that's all I'm looking for. And if it does that for me, chances are it will for other people as well. So that's the approach I'm taking. Think about that for what approach you want to take. Do you want the colors? Do you want the textures? Do you want a combination? Do you want the fences, the pots, the green stocks, the pathways, the colored stones? There are so many things you can do. And consider starting small if you're not sure, with a single painted rock, or maybe a single board leaned up against the fence so you can see if that color is going to fit right. Start small, and then you can figure out if it's something that you want to do on a much bigger scale, and you'll probably like it a lot more. So thank you to all of you. Pam says, many thanks, Gardener Scott, for sharing your wonderful ideas. I'm also trying to grow lots of flowers. So glad to hear that, Pam. I'm looking forward to all of your comments as we move forward on this journey, because I'll be talking more about flowers as I try putting some more in. I'll be making more videos about flowers. I'll still be doing all my vegetable stuff, all my building stuff, but moving in different phases on your journey, I think, is important to help us continue on that journey and learn new things as we're trying new things. Next week, we'll be talking something new in gardening to get your week started great. So great to have you here this week. I look forward to seeing you same time, same channel, same gardening discussion next week. I hope all of you have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you then. Enjoy gardening.